Greetings, colleagues, friends. I'm so glad to be able to be with you in this way and to share again after a few years now. The last time we were together physically in Moscow was some 3 years ago. Please allow me to share my screen. I'm going to run through a PowerPoint. It's the first time I'm doing a PowerPoint basically since the confinements started, since I moved to doing Zooms and telepresence without the background of PowerPoint. But I want to go quickly through a number of points and pick up some issues rather rapidly. So if you'll bear with me, we'll move to a PowerPoint presentation. Here it is. I hope you can see that. It's now, the title page should be showing. This is the Foresight and Science, Technology and Innovation Policy Conference, as you all know, and I want to talk about futures literacy and complexity, integrating uncertainty as a condition, not a variable. I want to go back to a little while in the past when we were discussing these issues. This is 3 years ago. I asked at that time if we were witnessing the birth of a discipline, and I think that I was trying to make the point. It was something that we were discussing in a way that was appropriate at that time, but I think today it's even more salient. For obvious reasons, I think that we all understand. But the idea here basically was that the discipline of anticipation, so this is the disciplinary aspect, studies the anticipatory systems and processes that enable humanity to use its capacity to imagine, to bring the non-existent future into the present. In other words, it's our capacity to imagine that allows us to create in the present an idea of the future. I think that's a fairly straightforward proposition. And as most of you know, the book Transforming the Future, Anticipation in the 21st Century tries to outline that in some detail. The English edition had just been published at the time that we last met, and I tried to address this question of an inflection point in the field of future studies. It's now also available in French and Arabic, soon to come out in Chinese and Spanish, and always available online for free for those who wish to download it. The kind of inspiration, as it were, for this was something that I put on the screen last time we met, and I'll read it here again. When philosophers spoke of indetermination, of freedom, they meant by indetermination a competition between possibles, by freedom a choice between possibles, as if possibility was not created by freedom itself. We must resign ourselves to the inevitable. It is the real which makes itself possible, and not the possible which becomes real. Philosophy has never frankly admitted this continuous creation of unforeseeable novelty. So that's Henry Bergson in The Creative Mind. And I think that this is really one of the fundamental challenges for humanity. But the question is how? I mean, it's a challenge because it's not obvious what to do with this observation. Integrating complexity seems like an impractical proposition. How can you name the as of yet unnameable? What can we do about that which is unknowable in advance? And what might be the handle or practical way in for human agency to grasp this condition? So in this sense, for me, the discipline is related to sort of the challenges that we face. It's a question that we can address in a variety of different ways. And the kind of starting point and experience that was the case of my career was that the future is the key to this challenge, but the dominant way of thinking about the future almost makes it impossible to actually address the challenge. And so we get variations on Niebuhr's famous prayer: Father, give us courage to change what must be altered, serenity to accept what cannot be helped, and the insight to know the one from the other. Only there's no way to actually know. You cannot know what must be changed, and you cannot serenely accept what cannot be helped because you don't know. All we can really do is improvise. But the long dominant framing of human agency uses the future as the basis for knowing why and how to make the changes that are necessary. In other words, it's the future that's the operative component of this way of thinking about our ability to think about change and then to act on change. So in other words, our human agency is contingent on our imagination, because that's the way the future exists in the present. But then the question becomes, how do we use our imagination? And I think it's fair to observe that over millennia, in almost all communities, planning took precedence over improvisation. The victory of planning over improvisation starts from initial conditions. All living organisms contain anticipatory systems and processes. Humans deploy simple anticipatory systems and processes in the early part of life. We practice catch-up and convergence notions of creating images of the future, how to be like Big Brother, Big Sister, Mother, Father, how to be like Silicon Valley, how to be the fourth industrial revolution, how to imagine the future on the basis of the past and on the basis of others. But in many circumstances, these simple anticipatory systems and processes are not sufficient. I mean, certainly a baby and a child testing out very basic, simple anticipatory systems wants to have the confirmation and certainty of predictable cause and effect. But as you move into adolescence, as a child, as all humans move into adolescence, into the age of teenagers, things become much more ambiguous, and your anticipatory systems on who is a friend, what is a signal of hostility or not, how to construct one's relationships and identities, all of that does not actually work with simple anticipatory systems and processes. You have to have the ability, which is not very well cultivated, which is part of my point, to understand the differences, the uncertainties, the emergence, the things that are unknowable in advance. And we've had a fetishism for continuity, for legacy, for certainty as security, for immortality as status, and a fear of change and difference. In other words, we've essentially, in some ways, diminished our own capacity to use our imagination. And this is in many ways convenient for existing systems of power. It helps to reproduce the power structures over time. The failure to cultivate human anticipatory systems and processes, which I'm not arguing was a conscious or prescient choice, has consequences. It sets us up in opposition to our universe's fundamental, creative, unknowable, and often unimaginable and advanced complex state. It sets us down a path that privileges false notions of permanency, hence predictability, certainty, path dependency, brittleness, fragility, and an untenable pursuit of superiority against change and the world that surrounds us. We want to colonize tomorrow and control the world around us to our own superior ends. This is characteristic of many, many, many civilizations and many, many communities. And I think it comes from a fundamental restriction or impoverishment, if you will, of our imagination. It creates a situation where there's an uncultivatability of wisdom. We cannot cultivate wisdom in this context. The anxieties of pursuing certainty and the realities of reproducing past power structures generates the dominance of preparatory and push learning. As a result, efforts to understand the world become efforts to establish predictive certainty, conflating science's constant questioning with the faith of divine prescience and prophecy. Experimentation, play, learning by doing, along with the practices for accumulating and attributing status to wisdom are peripheral, denigrated, uncultivated. Wisdom and pro learning wither, hierarchy and credentialism dominate, defense of sunk costs, the walls, the concrete, the pyramids, and hostility to change and difference are instilled in the world around us. We live in fear because we're constantly trying to somehow stave off that terrible menace of change, surprise, and uncertainty. So in this context, it's not entirely surprising that there hasn't been a lot of study of anticipatory systems and processes. On the other hand, you humans have no choice but to contend with uncertainty. And in many ways, we are aware it is the only certainty. Yet for diverse reasons, it is both reassuring and given the evolutionary emergence of the pursuit of certainty as a viable and overarching cross-time and contexts belief system, to ignore those anticipatory systems and processes that integrate uncertainty, the perpetual emergence of difference and the unnamed. In other words, we've diminished our own capacity, meaning we reject or resist the open potential of the present that is the fertile soil for inspiration, improvisation, learning by doing, and experimentation. So that leads me again to the inflection point, to the idea of the discipline of anticipation, future studies as the study of anticipatory systems and processes. Future literacy as the capacity to use the future for different reasons in different ways in different contexts. So this is the cultivation of this capability by studying anticipatory systems and processes. I showed this slide last time. The future does not exist in the present, but anticipation does. The form the future takes in the present is anticipation, but how to discover it, how to see it, how to expand and deepen and refine our understanding of the human anticipatory systems and processes, particularly those conscious ones, which are connected to the way we use our imagination. Now, to make this invisible visible, the challenge of revealing anticipatory assumptions, the why, what, and how of the imaginary future, you need a theoretical foundation. You need a hypothesis to motivate your exploration. It can be a very learning-oriented hypothesis, not something that's necessarily related to an empiricist premise per se, but rather something that says, how can I, through a variety of different means and through a variety of different experiences in many different contexts, begin to understand the nature of anticipatory systems and processes that are around us. So many of you know that we've run futures literacy laboratories with the intention, the goal of revealing anticipatory assumptions, of exploring the diversity and the distinguishing attributes of the anticipatory systems and processes that are extant, that are characteristic of human activity. And we've been able to run them in all continents under many, many different kinds of circumstances. And you'll be aware that the effort to do this is motivated in part by the desire to test an analytical framework that distinguishes, that allows us to deepen. This is the Futures Literacy Framework. The Futures Literacy Framework is a work in progress, and the language and the terminology and the specifics are absolutely evolving, and there are many, many people contributing to the development of different aspects of this framework. But the intention here is not to close the debate, but to open the debate into the issue of how to distinguish different anticipatory systems and processes, how to understand what's going on, and to design processes for studying, but also acquiring capability in different anticipatory systems and processes. I mean, perhaps at the end of the day, let's say 20 years from now, or who knows, it'll turn out that the agreement is there's no distinction. All the anticipatory systems and processes are just one or two, and that's it. And there's no point in trying to deepen our understanding or refine our knowledge. But the premise here is to try and pursue the proposition that we can begin to study anticipatory systems and processes in greater depth, and that by so doing, obviously, we can enhance our capability to use the future more effectively. And the idea here is that the anticipatory assumptions that characterize the different categories or different types of anticipatory systems and processes can be divided into different terms, which is AA1 for forecasting, AA2 for destiny, AA3 for creative reforms, AA4 for self-improvement, and now AA5, which I did initially indicate as strategic novelty, with a use of the term strategic, which I now think is inaccurate, because I think strategy is too deeply wedded to planning. My original conception was that there's a paradigmatic attribute of strategic choice, meaning don't fight the previous war, which means try to understand a really fundamentally different grounds or point of departure for what's going on, was one of the things that could emerge from a novelty appreciating perspective. But I think that leads to some confusion because strategy is so closely wedded to planning and is so generally, let's call it, possessed or occupied or claimed by a particular strategic point of view, rather than a competition between different strategies or between different paradigms. So the idea of transitions here is that we can't identify transformation because transformation is unnameable, unknowable in advance. But what we can distinguish is when we are departing from the current paradigm. In other words, we can begin to see where there are incompatibilities, fundamental differences of point of view and ways of thinking, flat earth, round earth kind of shifts in the way people see and understand the world. So AA5, I've modified slightly since the book into what I would call transitions, or the ability to identify transitional aspects of the world around us, things that depart from the way things currently function, related obviously to novelty. And then finally, there's the wisdom and not doing of AA6. The idea here is to be able to use these categories and distinctions in order to design processes to reveal, explore in more depth different anticipatory systems and processes. So FLL, Futures Literacy Laboratories, related to forecasting, N is for novelty, etc. So the idea here is that these kind of categories facilitate a research agenda, but obviously also a learning agenda. I said back in the last 3 years ago that we have proof of concept evidence that anticipatory assumptions that make up conscious human anticipatory systems and processes can be detected, that there is evidence of the diversity of reasons and methods for using the future. The Futures Literacy Framework is useful. It defines futures literacy as a competency. It helps us to conduct research into anticipatory assumptions. It allows us to design processes to research anticipatory assumptions, such as futures literacy laboratories. There's no argument here that futures literacy laboratories are the only mechanism or approach to understanding anticipatory assumptions. There are many others. It just happens to be one that's effective in certain circumstances. Futures literacy labs as processes for using the futures literacy framework are effective and efficient. We need more work on prototyping in different contexts. People, and the conclusion here as well, and from the proof of concept point of view, is people are generally not futures literate. This is inimical to reconciling human agency with complexity, a serious source of a painful clash between expectations and the world as it emerges. You know, all of you, that there are many UNESCO chairs either already established or as candidates. There are many more candidates on the way. I think it's indicative of the resonance of an anticipatory systems perspective, but not alone, of course, because there are many other factors that are creating an enthusiasm for people to think about the future in different ways for different reasons. But primarily, as we all know, it's in a planning mode. And that remains the dominant perspective. I want to end again with this same slide that I used 3 years ago from Wittgenstein. Getting hold of the difficulty deep down is what is hard, because if it is grasped near the surface, it simply remains the difficulty it was. It has to be pulled out by the roots, and that involves our beginning to think in a new way. And I like that beginning because it's precisely a transitional perspective. We don't know exactly what it's going to be like. And of course, as many of you have heard me say, I can't tell you if this is going to be better or worse for humanity. But what I can say is that I think we will understand the world around us in a more effective way. And I believe that by understanding it better, we can alter our relationship to the world and align it in ways that I believe will be more congruent with the way it actually functions. Will that generate better outcomes for the future? I don't know. But it seems to me, given the current ills of the world around us and the long-standing nature attributes of the reproduction of oppression and the reproduction of things that we claim we don't want, that making this effort to understand the nature of the world around us, to integrate complexity as a condition, not as something that dial-ups or dials down, and understanding better the way in which our imagination can play a role in this augmentation. Many of you have heard me say that reading and writing augments the capacity that humans have to speak. I think that futures literacy augments the capacity that humans have to imagine. And so I think it is a universally accessible and universally important, in other words, effective, useful capability for all humans. You've seen this before as well. I think in part, this is what we're doing. It doesn't strike me as a very wise way to do things, if I could say that, with the foresight, forecasting, prophetic leader taking us from point A to point B on the basis of setting goals and then doing what needs to be done. But just imagine putting this tightrope in place. What an incredible policy achievement to put that tightrope into place already. But then having the courage to lead people across that tightrope. Wow, what a feat. But I think how we anticipate matters. It changes the present and might allow us to reconsider this image and model of leadership and the way humanity goes into the future. Thank you, and look forward to being together next time.